Hello, my name is Owen, and welcome to a quick review of Taylor Jenkins Reid's Daisy Jones and the Six. What I want to do is give a brief overview of the book is about, then tell you the things that I liked, then tell you the things that I didn't like. Jumping straight into the overview, this book follows documentary style of interviews with this band, Daisy Jones and the Six. It's kind of the rise of the band The Six, rise of Daisy Jones, and how they came together to make an album and to do a tour and all the drama that ensued. So like I said, it's documentary style, so it's like interviews of the band members as they're older, looking back on their past and reflecting like exactly like a documentary would be. And in the context of this universe, this album was incredible. These are just an extraordinarily famous rock band, an iconic album. And from what I understand, it's like loosely based on like the drama of like Fleetwood Mac. You can only imagine that kind of stuff that goes on in this book. And for those of you that didn't know, I've been on a bit of an audiobook kick recently. I've been on a bit of a Taylor Jenkins Reid kick recently. I read Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and immediately loved it. Immediately started this book. So with that in mind of how much I love that book, I couldn't help but compare the two. So just keep that in mind as I'm giving my thoughts here. As for the things that I liked, well, to go back to Seven Husbands real quick, one of the things I liked about that book was its unique structure, like the framing of the husbands, the flashbacks, going to present day, stuff like that. This takes weird structure of a book to a whole new extreme, because it's purely that interview documentary of characters in the future looking back on their past, and it's established in the very beginning of the book that these characters do not have the same view of events, and they do not tell the same story of events, whether because they're purposely lying because they're trying to hide something, or they just remember things differently. It's unclear, but it's a battle of warring perspectives. Unreliable narrators all around, and it just makes for such an interesting read. Unlike anything I've read before, like it really did feel like a documentary, and it felt very, very real, which is another thing with Evelyn Hugo. It feels like she was a very, very real person, that you could watch her movies and watch the clips that they're talking about of her movies. You feel like you could listen to the music of this band and that this band is real. And thanks to the show, you can listen to the music. I gave it a listen. Quite frankly, wasn't a fan. Because how can you make a show where it's like this music is iconic, and then you make a show and you have to like make the music as good as you said that it was? It's just not gonna happen. It's just not gonna happen. And quite frankly, listen, I didn't really give it a fair shake, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen. But regardless, the band felt real, and you could almost like picture in your head what the music was like when these characters are giving their life story there. And I thought that was a fascinating way to do it. And unreliable narrators is a very, very interesting part of literature that I enjoy, that I really don't get enough of. And the fact that it's just like, you had these high intensity scenes where Daisy will be like, then he said this, and then Billy will be like, I didn't say that, I said this. And then it's just like, it's literally back and forth and back and forth. And just through like the context of these characters and how we get to know these characters and the situations they're in, I would say it's always fairly obvious, maybe not who's exactly right, but whose perspective we should be leaning towards for the truth. Like for example, I forget his name, I forget which one he is rather. One of the bandmates is very clearly jealous of Billy, and he kind of feels like his like starlight, like he feels like he should be a bigger star, and like his guitar solos are being taken away, stuff like that. Hated that guy, by the way. But you could tell like he is framed in this perspective of bitterness, and looking back at this time period, it was like, oh, like Billy was an ass, and he took all my solos, and like you know what I mean. Versus other characters look on Billy more favorably as like the lead singer and the leader of the band. So it's just like perspectives like that. It very easily sets up these characters where they're coming from, and then allows you to like kind of pick apart their narratives. And that is especially true with the romance that ensues between two of the main characters. We know Billy's flaws. We know Daisy's flaws. We know all these other characters' flaws and their goals, which helps us pick apart. Maybe you're not telling me the truth here. And why would you not be telling me the truth? Like, what are you trying to hide? Maybe it makes you look bad if you tell the truth. Just like a real life. That's why it was so good, because it's so realistic that these people, even in their old age, would admit some of the bad things they did, because they know how bad it makes them look. So in like a documentary about their lives, they're going to try to flip the narrative around to make themselves look better. It was absolutely a blast to read that. And I thought it was so unique and so expertly well done. And again, too, Reid is such a great like setting vibe creator. Like you read like when they're telling these stories about these rock band, you're really in that era, and you can just imagine the drugs and the sex and the chaos and the messiness of that time period. You're really immersed in it, and I think it makes for some of the most fun reading, or I guess listening in this case, that I've had in a while. That being said, as for the things that I didn't like, there's really only one thing. And what ties into things that I liked is the characters were great, the setting was great, the structure was great. The only thing that I feel like it was lacking, and this is where it comes into comparison to Seven Husbands, it's lacking, how do you say, like a little bit of, like there's something missing, and it's not something that can be said in words. I know that's so unhelpful, but it's just a layer of depth, perhaps, a layer of like emotional punch, perhaps, because especially at the end, when everything's wrapping up, you really, like I really wanted to be more emotionally invested, but instead I was just like fascinated, if that makes sense. Because it's like, if I would have grew up with this band in real life, if I would have been a fan of their music, this documentary would have like broke me and said, oh, the person I love, you know what I mean? But they're not real, but Jenkins makes a great way of seeing they are real. But it's just like me, then it just made it so I'm watching or listening to a documentary of a band that I know nothing about, and just like this really interesting story that happened to these real people. So in a way, like them feeling really real hurt it, because I didn't get invested as if like, you know what I mean? Like it's like if The Who came out with a documentary and this was the story of their band, I'd be like, oh, that's so interesting. Like, wouldn't say I'm a big Who guy, but that's interesting that happened to them. You know what I mean? So, and compared to like Seven Husbands, where like Evelyn obviously is not a real actress, but I was so invested in her story that the ending and the culmination of the theme in the story like was an emotional gut punch, and the twists I was there alongside with it. I didn't feel that this book, and it was extraordinarily fun. I think it was more of a fun read than Evelyn Hugo. I think it's, like I said, like one of the most fun reads I've read in a while. But it was lacking that depth that would make it a great book. And I think I said that in my Evelyn Hugo review, that book did become a great book versus a good book. And I think that just holding it back, and this, because it's so like ethereal, the thing I'm complaining about, I would just have to mark it down to a personal thing. I recommend this book to anybody because I thought it was so much fun and I liked it so much, but it just didn't quite cross over that threshold to me into like classic literature, fantastic, emotional, you know what I mean? And I think it's really just because of, and maybe the structure hinders that as well, because you don't get as much deep character growth. You're kind of just like separated at a distance from this interview structure. But I just think the ending, like, you know, there's a really sweet moment that happens at the end that I'm like, oh, cool. Glad that worked out for them, I guess, but they're not real. So it's just like I have this detachment. And it is kind of, I don't know if that made any sense, what I just said there. But that's the only thing that was holding it back. And it's hardly a complaint, more of an observation. But yeah, that was my review. Taylor Jenkins Reid, great author, great book, very unique. I really liked it overall, and I do recommend it to people of all genre types. I especially think if you're a big fan of rock and roll, you're a big fan of like Fleetwood Mac, you could kind of draw the dots more to the storyline of real life, and also just like that era of rock and roll, which, as I said, like rock and roll fans in general. I think it's fascinating because I'm sure a lot of like real life bands had very, very similar stories in a lot of ways, and I'm sure like real rock heads, is that what they call themselves? I don't know. Can draw parallels to the bands that they love, and I think that's fascinating. I don't know. That's what I got. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more reviews like this in the future. Your support, as always, guys, is very appreciated, and thanks for sticking around.